Shabbat Shalom. We read one of the most difficult passages in all of Bereshit, the assault and abduction of Dinah. Dinah's status is actually something that we need to discuss. You see, in Judaism, we have certain categories for people in need. Most of us are familiar with the very basic ones. There are those that are hungry. There are those that are unclothed. There are those that are unhoused. And our usual solution would be to give them food, to give them clothes, to give them a place to live, right? Tzedakah in its varied forms is there to take care of those in need. That much I think all of us are pretty clear on. Now, occasionally when there is a shortage of funding available, sometimes we'll need to prioritize exactly who will receive from the meager resources of the community. So, for example, if you have an orphan come and you have somebody that is a full adult, who do you think gets priority? The orphan. Very good. See, you're all intuitively on the same page, or perhaps you've studied this before. But there is one category of those in need that traditionally supersedes every other category of need: a captive. Those that are being held captive. Now, that phrase captive is difficult for us to understand in modern American situation in English. Because for us, captive connotes a whole range of things. But in Judaism, it was very much a specific and all too real crisis that would happen. Which is to say, kidnapping for profit. That was the purpose of the action. That raiders, pirates, whatever you want to call them, would attack someone on the open sea, in the village, on the caravan route, and they would abduct them, not for what they had on them, but for what they could ransom them back for to the community. This was a business for these pirates, these bandits. And it was much more lucrative than just going through their wallet. Because it turns out that communities are often very willing to ransom back a member of the community for a lot more than that person might have been carrying on them when they were abducted. Everybody following the situation? Now, there used to be spates of kidnappings in America that were similar to this, that is to say, pure kidnappings just for money. It's not quite so common anymore. It is still common in many other parts of the world, however, where kidnap for ransom is a business for many, many people. Now, what is Judaism's response for somebody that has been kidnapped for ransom? Where do we put them on the scale of those in need? Are they above? Are they below those that are hungry? Are they above or below those that are unclothed? How do we fit them into the hierarchy of what we are capable of doing? Any ideas? We set them first. Now, we're not allowed to take money away from orphans. That's like the only caveat. But apart from that, the community is absolutely not only allowed to, but is required to do everything in their power to ransom those that have been taken captive. In fact, it is considered such an extreme level that you would violate multiple mitzvot if you did not do everything in your power to redeem them. You would be standing idly by the blood of another. You would be hardening your heart. You would be closing your hand against them. The law codes are explicit. And of course, Shulchan Aruch says it most poignantly: one who delays even a moment when they have the capacity to redeem a captive, it is as though they are spilling their blood themselves. Captivity was no fun. In fact, when the Talmud discusses the various deprivations that come from war, captivity is at the top of the list. They say famine comes with war. Death, of course, comes with war in a variety of ways, and obviously being killed by violence comes during war, killed by the hand of the sword, as we saw in the Torah portion. But captivity is worse than all of those, because captivity includes all of those. You see, there is an implicit understanding among the captors that they will make life horrible for those that are in captivity in order to induce the community to pony up the cash, to ransom them out. So they're not being kept in the 4-star hotel. They're not being treated with kid gloves. They are being harshly treated in order to inspire the community to quickly gather the funding to redeem them. Everybody's still on the same page, yes. All right. So are there limits then? Does that mean if they say, we want you to sell everything in the community, every single piece of asset belonging to every single member, that is the price for ransoming this person? Does the community do so? No. Why not? If this is one of the very highest things, if we are literally saving a life, what, the price of your car is too high a price? The money you've got in your savings account is too dear to you that it's not worth someone's life? No, says the Talmud, it's not that we are stingy or that we begrudge. And in fact, throughout history, it became known that Jews would always redeem their captives for a price much higher than the going rate of other types of captives. But that was the point, that if we became too generous with our giving to the captors, that it would become too enticing for them to continue to capture more people. Right? We would be incentivizing them. It's capitalism. If you can get 100 dinars per Jew when you can only get 10 dinars for a non-Jew, then who are you going to try and kidnap? The Jew, right? It's just good business sense. And we don't want to incentivize that sort of behavior. And so there were laws put in place that one could not redeem a captive at too high a price because it would incentivize additional captures of other people and only perpetuate this horrible, horrible program. But then there's an alternative. Perhaps what the community should do is mount a rescue party. Perhaps what they should do is come up with a solution where they can go in, much like Shimon and Levi, murder the captors, rescue the hostage, and be out of there like a shot, right on Entebbe style. Makes a lot of sense, right? In fact, it worked in Entebbe very, very well. But the Talmud actually argues against it. And it's not for cowardice. It is, again, for an unflinching, realistic look at the world. If you go in and you rescue one captive, what, says the Talmud, is going to happen to the other captives that remain? They will be killed or put under harsher circumstances. The price for their redemption will be raised. It will only be worse for them. And more than that, even if there were no other captives currently in captivity with this group that you rescued them from, what will happen the next time they take captives? They will put them under harsher lock and key. They will treat them worse. They will make life even more miserable for those in captivity because of the rescue party. Now, you may think that seems a little unreasonable. We should still do everything we can. Well, yes and no. Remember, the policy for a very long time was to negotiate with hostage takers. For those of you who may have remembered all of the hostage situations in the 70s and 80s, that there were negotiations and there were deals made, and then eventually the idea was, we're going to stop this. We are no longer negotiating, we are no longer making deals, we will have rescue parties go in, and if the hostages are killed, it's no worse than if the terrorists did it, and we might be able to save some, but this will discourage them. We will be lowering the price that they were able to get for the hostages, and that will put an end to these hijackings. And it did. We got 9/11 instead. Because if the hijackers realized they could no longer negotiate and no longer get anything for taking hostages when they hijacked a plane, then the next best thing was to turn the plane itself into the weapon. And that became the new goal. Now, we've put in other security measures to try and prevent that, and thank God we've been mostly successful in most parts of the world. But you can see that those who wish to do these things are going to find another way. And so the Talmud cautions us to not think that there are easy solutions to these problems. And indeed, we see exactly the same concern in the words of Jacob, when he says to his two sons who have just rescued their daughter, his daughter, now they are going to attack us. Now they are going to gang up on us. Now we will be in trouble. And you can feel the fear in his voice. It works out, because God was very personally on Jacob's side right then, that they were actually more afraid than they were angry, and so they were able to make good their escape without further retaliation. If you want to know more about that, you can check out my Wednesday class on YouTube. But it was a close-run thing. It could have been much, much worse for the entire family. So does that mean then that those that are in captive, we just pay a reasonable price? If we can't pay a reasonable price, we ignore them and we don't do anything else? Well, it's never that simple. Like everything else in Jewish law, there are details to each case. Sometimes it is worth being able to go in to rescue them, as Entebbe proved. Sometimes it is worth holding off if the price is too high. If they are asking for the release of murderers and terrorists, perhaps the saving of this one life is not worth the jeopardizing of many, many thousands more. But then we come to the situation in Gaza, which obviously is on all of our minds. And you might be thinking, well, then how do we apply this to Gaza? Did we pay too high a price for the captives in Gaza when they were released over this last week? Should we have paid a higher price in order to get the rest of those that are currently being held captive and secure their freedom? I'd like to argue that the people in Gaza are not captives, according to Jewish law. They are obviously being held against their will. They are obviously those that were kidnapped. But captive in Jewish law has a very particular idea, a very particular definition. It is, as I said before, those who were kidnapped for the purpose of profit. That is the goal. The goal was, I'm going to kidnap you, and then I'm going to send a note to your family. They will pay me a lot of money, and then you will go free. I've got nothing against you personally. I've got no agenda that I'm trying to make clear by your capture. I just want the money. I just want cash. That's my relationship to this abduction. That was not why people were kidnapped in Gaza, well, in Israel and taken to Gaza. They were not taken just as a financial investment. They weren't even taken just as a bargaining chip to be able to secure the release of Palestinian prisoners. Had they been only taken for that, then the negotiations would have begun earlier, and the negotiations would have continued until all the hostages of Israel were released, with whatever corresponding number of Palestinians had been handed over to Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. But that's not what happened. Hamas did not negotiate to release the maximum number of prisoners. They did not negotiate to get the maximum value from each of the hostages. They seemed quite content, indeed willing to break a ceasefire, to hold on to those remaining hostages, because they are not captives in the classic sense of the word. Pirates are one type of species of criminal. They come, they want money, that is their purpose. They're not out for an agenda other than self-enrichment. Hamas and other terrorist groups are not pirates. They may engage in piracy and engage in kidnapping and engage in murder. It may look very similar. They may hold on to hostages, but they are not holding on to them purely as a business investment. They are holding on to them for other purposes. And we have to recognize that that means the traditional means of dealing with hostage takers will not work. Yes, sometimes we are able to come to terms, and thank God the Israeli government was able to find an acceptable bargain that would allow them to free those that have been freed. That is a miracle, and it is wonderful. But the fact remains that Hamas is not actually interested in the successful negotiation of the hostages. Remember, they still win whether they release additional Palestinian prisoners or not. They win simply by having the publicity among the others that hate Israel that they were able to strike a blow against the Zionist entity. That is their victory. Other things can be nice, and yes, they can get credit, especially in the West Bank, for having released some of the political prisoners that are being held there that they were able to secure. But ultimately, that is secondary to the publicity they receive among other militant groups and militant-minded folks for having attacked in the first place. And so, ultimately, they don't care about the hostages, other than as a symbol of their strength and of their victory. Which means we cannot use the logic that the Talmud gives us for how to negotiate in these situations. It means, unfortunately, that Israel is in, as it has been for the last few decades, more uncharted territory. Our ancestors could not imagine that someone would murder a hostage simply as a billboard to others to show that they were sufficiently full of hate that they should receive your endorsement. That is a novel consideration, one that was not found in the ancient world. And yet, this is what Israel must deal with. How? Well, I'm not a military commander, I'm not a politician in the Israeli Knesset, but what we can see is what Israel has begun to already do, which is to recognize that it is unlikely that any additional hostages will be freed peacefully. If Hamas had wanted that, they were already in the midst of a ceasefire that was possible to be extended as long as they were willing to release more. They chose not to. Israel did not stop the exchange. Hamas did. Israel did not break the ceasefire. Hamas did. Which means Israel now has only the recourse to violence, like Shimon and Levi, to secure the release. And if we look back at Dinah, we can see exactly why. Dinah, too, although she looks like she was a captive, was not. She was abducted not for the personal gain of Shechem. She was abducted because he wanted to keep her. And that meant there was no negotiation that would release her. There was no price that Jacob and family could pay to bring her home. The only solution to bring her home, to truly give her back her freedom, was to go into the town and do what needed to be done. And they knew that they risked her life in doing so. But they also knew that they could not simply turn their back on their sister. And so too, Israel will not turn its back on its brothers and sisters that still remain in captivity, but recognize that the deeds that they must do, the violence that must be wielded to try and secure their freedom and to try and prevent any additional atrocities, may not be successful. But that does not mean it is not necessary. It is a shame. It is heartbreaking. It is tragic. And unfortunately, there isn't an easy end in sight. But may those who remain in captivity be freed through the vigilance of those who come to their rescue. And may no others ever be put in that position. May it come speedily to pass. Bimhera v'yameinu. Shabbat shalom.